The studio lights were bright, but the air was thick with something no one could quite describe. It was supposed to be a regular filming day, one that would bring laughter, creativity, and the familiar chemistry between the stars who had spent countless hours together on set. Yet from the moment Dylan Wang stepped into the studio, everyone could sense that something was off. Shen Yue was already seated near the director's monitor, flipping through her script, her face calm yet distracted. Bai Lu stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The tension between the three had been quietly growing over the past few weeks, whispered about by crew members but never directly addressed. Today, however, it would all come crashing down. Dylan greeted the crew with his usual charm, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. He nodded at Shen Yue, their eyes meeting for a brief second, a silent acknowledgement of unspoken words that still lingered between them. But when his gaze shifted to Bai Lu, something in the air changed. She looked at him, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but then she hesitated. That hesitation only made the silence more unbearable. The director clapped his hands, breaking the quiet. "All right, everyone, let's run through the scene one more time before we roll," he announced. The cast gathered, scripts in hand, but the mood was far from focused. Bai Lu glanced at Dylan again, her voice soft but sharp enough for everyone nearby to hear. "It must be nice," she said suddenly, "to walk around pretending nothing ever happened." The words sliced through the room like glass. The chatter stopped. Even the director froze mid-step. Dylan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He simply looked at her, his eyes cold, his silence louder than any shout. Shen Yu's eyes darted between them, her hands clutching her script tighter, her heartbeat racing. She knew this wasn't about the scene they were rehearsing, it was about something deeper, something that had been buried too long. "Bai Lu," the director started, trying to defuse the moment, but she continued. "People keep asking me if I'm fine," Bai Lu said, her voice trembling slightly now, "but how can I be fine when someone I trusted made me feel like I was never even seen?" The room fell still again. Dylan's hand twitched at his side, his breath shallow. Shen Yue stood, stepping closer, her voice soft and calm. "Bai Lu, maybe this isn't the time," she said gently. But Bai Lu shook her head. "No, you. It's exactly the time. Because we've all been pretending for too long." Dylan finally spoke, his tone low and steady. "You don't know what I went through, Bai Lu. You never asked. You just assumed." Her eyes glistened as she looked at him. "Then tell me, Dylan," she whispered, "what did I assume wrong?" There was a long pause, heavy with emotion and regret. The crew watched in silence, sensing that what was unfolding was far from scripted. Dylan took a slow breath, his voice barely audible. "That I didn't care." Shen Yu's eyes softened, her heart breaking as she listened. Bai Lu's lips trembled, tears threatening to fall, but she quickly looked away, trying to steady herself. "Then why did you leave?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you make it so easy for everyone to believe I was the one at fault?" Dylan turned his back slightly, struggling to control the storm brewing inside him. "Because staying would have hurt more than leaving," he said quietly. The words hung in the air, like a confession no one was ready to hear. Bai Lu's eyes widened, realizing what he meant, but before she could respond, Dylan dropped his script onto the table. The sound echoed through the studio like thunder. "I can't do this right now," he said firmly. Without another glance, he walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing behind him as the heavy door closed. The silence that followed was deafening. Shen Yue looked at Bai Lu, who stood frozen, her tears finally spilling down her cheeks. The director sighed deeply, exchanging glances with the assistant. No one dared to speak. Outside, Dylan stood under the cloudy sky, breathing heavily. He closed his eyes, replaying her words in his head. The sound of her voice, the pain in her tone, it was too much to carry. Yet he couldn't bring himself to walk away completely. Not yet. Moments later, Shen Yue appeared beside him. She didn't say a word at first. She simply stood there, her presence calm, grounding. Then she spoke softly. "You could have just told her, Dylan." He turned his head slightly. "Told her what?" "That you still care," she said, her eyes searching his face. "Because whether you admit it or not, that's what's tearing both of you apart." He sighed, looking at the ground. "Caring doesn't fix what's already broken." "Maybe not," she replied, "but pretending it doesn't matter only breaks it more." There was a long silence between them before Dylan whispered, "You always know what to say." Shen Yue gave a faint smile, the kind that carried a hint of sadness. "Maybe because I've been where she is." The wind blew softly, carrying away the echoes of the confrontation inside. Dylan looked up at the sky again, his expression torn between pain and peace. "Maybe one day," he said quietly, "we'll all stop hurting each other without meaning to." Shen Yue nodded. "Maybe one day." As they stood there, the clouds parted slightly, and for a brief moment, the sunlight touched their faces. Inside, the set remained silent, a space filled with unspoken apologies and shattered emotions. Bai Lu sat on the edge of a chair, staring at the door Dylan had walked through, realizing that sometimes, silence speaks louder than any words ever could. It was a moment that no one would forget, a glimpse into the reality behind the glamour, the pain behind the smiles, and the truth behind the people who seemed untouchable. That day in the studio didn't just reveal tension, it revealed humanity. And it left everyone who witnessed it forever changed. The studio was wrapped in a silence that felt heavy enough to crush the air itself. Bai Lu stood frozen, her eyes still wide, her lips trembling as if the weight of her own words had finally caught up with her. The cameras were still rolling, the soft red light blinking faintly in the corner, but no one moved. Not even Shen Yue, who had been watching the scene unfold from her mark near the lighting rig. Dylan's footsteps echoed as he left, each one fading but slicing through the silence like a quiet storm. The sound of the door closing behind him was soft but final, the kind of sound that told everyone something had just ended. Bai Lu lowered her head, her long hair falling over her face as tears began to trace their way down her cheeks. She didn't speak. She didn't move. The director called cut, but even he sounded hesitant, as if his own voice didn't belong in the room anymore. The scene was supposed to be fiction, but something inside it had turned painfully real. Shen Yue hesitated before stepping forward. She looked from the door Dylan had disappeared through to Bai Lu, then back again. She had seen this tension growing over the past few weeks, seen how their words on camera had begun to carry pieces of their truth. It was as if the script had become a mirror, reflecting feelings neither of them dared to admit. "Bai Lu," Shen Yue said quietly, "what happened out there?" Bai Lu's voice was faint, almost lost in the air. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered. "I was angry, I was tired. But he didn't even look at me." Shen Yue took a slow breath, then moved closer. "You know him," she said softly. "He walks away when he feels too much. It's not about anger, it's about control. He can't face what's real." But Bai Lu only shook her head. "No," she said, her voice trembling. This time felt different. This time it felt like he really meant to leave. Outside, the wind brushed against the tall studio glass, rattling faintly as Dylan leaned against his car. He didn't start the engine. He didn't even look back at the building. His phone was in his hand, the screen dark, the messages unread. The things Bai Lu said replayed in his mind, word for word, tone for tone. "You always pretend to care, Dylan," her voice echoed in his memory, soft but sharp, like something that had been waiting too long to be said. "But when it really matters, you run away." He closed his eyes, resting his head against the seat. He knew she was right, and that was what hurt the most. A knock came on the window. It was Shen Yue. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there until he rolled the window halfway down. "She's still inside," Shen Yue said. "She's crying, Dylan." He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "It's not about what she said," he murmured. "It's about what she meant." "And what did she mean?" Shen Yue asked gently. Dylan hesitated, then looked away. "That maybe she's tired of pretending too." Back inside, the crew had quietly packed up, leaving only a few faint lights glowing on the set. Bai Lu was still sitting on the edge of the stage floor, her makeup slightly smudged, her hands clasped together tightly. The empty chairs, the fading hum of the studio lights, everything felt like it was holding its breath. When the door opened again, she didn't turn. But she felt it, the shift in the air, the sound of his footsteps returning. Dylan stood a few feet behind her, his shadow stretching long across the floor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Why did you come back?" she finally asked, her voice low. Dylan sighed. "Because leaving didn't feel right," he said quietly. "And because you didn't deserve to be left with silence." Bai Lu turned then, her eyes still wet but softer now. "I shouldn't have said what I said," she whispered. "I was hurt. I thought you didn't care anymore." "I do care," Dylan said. "Maybe too much. And that's the problem. Every time I look at you, I remember everything we're trying to forget." Her eyes met his, and for the first time in weeks, the walls between them began to crack. She stood slowly, facing him under the soft glow of the studio lights. "Then stop pretending we can just move on," she said. "Stop pretending this is just acting." Dylan's chest rose and fell as if the air had suddenly become heavier. He took a small step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to say, Bai Lu? That I still care? That I can't watch you without feeling everything I'm not supposed to feel?" She didn't answer, just watched him, her tears glistening under the lights. "I came back," he continued, his voice breaking slightly, "because when you said those words, I realized something. I wasn't walking away because I was angry. I was walking away because I was afraid. Afraid that if I stayed, I'd tell you everything." The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't cold. It was filled with something tender, something real. Bai Lu took a slow step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of him. "Then tell me," she said softly. "Tell me what you were afraid to say." Dylan looked at her, his expression raw. "That I never stopped caring," he whispered. "That every scene, every take, every moment next to you still feels real to me." Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching as the words sank in. And for a brief, fragile second, the studio didn't feel like a studio anymore. It felt like a memory, a confession, a place where truth had finally found its way out. Then she smiled faintly through her tears. "You should have said that before walking out," she said quietly. He smiled too, a tired, broken kind of smile. "I'm saying it now," he replied. And as the lights dimmed one by one, they stood there, not as actors, not as co-stars, but as two people caught between what was scripted and what was real. The crew who had silently returned to watch from the shadows didn't speak. No one wanted to break the moment. When the last camera light went out, their silhouettes remained, two figures standing close enough to touch but far enough to still ache. And in that silence, in that almost moment, the tension that began with a few angry words ended in the quiet truth of what neither could deny anymore.